Hello everyone, this is your friend Lenz UACE alongside my colleague Mr. Akram Makumbi. We are going to take you through the Second World War. What was the Second World War? The Second World War, this was a war fought from the 3rd of September 1939 up to September 12th, 1945. The Second World War, this was a war fought between members of the Axis powers who included Italy under Benito Mussolini, Germany under Adolf Hitler, Japan under Emperor Hirohito and General Tojo. On the other side, Spain under General Franco, facing members of the Allied powers who included Russia under Joseph Stalin, the United States under a man by the names of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who died in 1945, and succeeded by Harry Truman, Britain under Winston Churchill, alongside France with the Free Army officers under General Charles de Gaulle. The Second World War started when Germany decided to invade Poland, overrunning the streets of Warsaw alongside the ports of Danzig. German troops under their leader Adolf Hitler. Okay. This later led to Britain and France declaring an ultimatum to Germany to withdraw her troops from Poland. However, Germany didn't listen. Then Britain, France decided to declare. You must understand that with the beginning of the war, the United States was not involved in the Second World War. What happened here? On the 7th of December 1941, the Japanese warplanes decided to bombard the US military base in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. After bombarding the US military base at Pearl Harbor, this angered the US president by the names of Franklin D. Roosevelt to declare war. During the period of 1939 to 1941, the war was in favor of the Axis powers. However, with the involvement of the United States, the tide of the war changed to favor the Allied powers. Then I'm still giving you an introduction, or what we call the preamble. What happened? Later, it must be noted that Italy was defeated in early 1945, then also Germany in May 1945. However, Japan persisted on fighting. Then the US president under the US president by then under Harry Truman. You must remember that Franklin D. Roosevelt died during the course of the Second World War. The US president under Harry Truman ordered the atomic bomb to be deployed to be deployed across the Japanese cities. So on the 6th of August 1945 and 9th of August 1945, the B-52 bombers flew over the airspace of Japan and dropped the atomic bomb on the streets and on the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This forced Japan under Emperor Hirohito to sign an armistice or surrender on the 12th of September 1945. Okay, now we are going to look at how did the First World War occur, reasons why how did the Second World War occur, and reasons why it occurred. You must understand there is no smoke without fire. Okay, we're gonna try to look at the events. This war didn't just come out of the blue. There are several reasons why the Second World War occurred. The first one was the unrealistic terms of the Versailles Peace Settlement of 1919. The Versailles Peace Settlement was the first Versailles Peace Settlement was the first diplomatic meeting that was held by the victorious powers after the First World War. It must be noted that the Versailles Peace Settlement of 1919 had very unrealistic terms towards Germany. And historians like me, we strongly believe that the seeds of the Second World War were sown at the Versailles Peace Settlement. How were the unrealistic terms of the Versailles Peace Settlement responsible for the outbreak of the Second World War? They can ask you a question like, during our times, the seeds of the Second World War were sown at the Versailles Peace Settlement discussed. Here you were supposed to look at the unrealistic terms of the Versailles Peace Settlement of 1919, give a strong standpoint, then you look at other factors. Very easy, okay? So let us look, what was the Versailles Peace Settlement? The Versailles Peace Settlement, this was the first diplomatic meeting that was held by victorious powers after the defeat of Germany during the First World War. It was held at the Hall of Mirrors on the 28th of June 1919. In order to fully understand this, let us look at its unrealistic terms. The first was the year, the date and the year when the Versailles Peace Settlement was held. The Versailles Peace Settlement was held 5 years exactly after the double assassination. What did this implication have? It brought back the memories. It brought back the memories amongst the great powers of how the war had occurred. It brought back the anger amongst allied powers. Okay, exactly. So it was held on the 28th of June to signify exactly when Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife was assassinated. Okay, 5 years anniversary, to remind the people, the attendees who had attended the Versailles Peace Settlement, that the disastrous previous war had been caused by these people. So Germany and her allies greatly viewed what we call, and her allies viewed this as a provocation, hence anger. Before we look at how the Versailles Peace Settlement occurred, let me just try to briefly explain to you who were the personalities who attended. This Versailles Peace Settlement did not just occur from the blue. You remember that France had been represented at the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles in Paris. France had been represented by its prime minister by the names of Georges Clemenceau. Britain was represented by Sir Lloyd George. Italy was represented by Orlando. Then other countries who included the US were represented by Wilson Woodrow. Wilson Woodrow came up with his 14 points as solutions, long-lasting peaceful solutions across Europe. However, his 14 points were rejected as one of the attendees, or the leader or the chair of the Versailles settlement, by the names of Georges Clemenceau, said the good Lord had 10 commandments and we disobeyed them. For Wilson Woodrow's 14, we shall see. Okay, so here we have looked at those personalities. Now back to how the unrealistic terms contributed to the outbreak of the Second World War. Also, you see that during the Versailles Peace Settlement, Germany lost her territories. For example, Germany was forced to cede. Germany was forced to cede or lost her what we call lost her southern German states of Alsace and Lorraine, of which these had around 4.5 million German speakers back to France. She even lost what we call her overseas colonies, such as Cameroon land, which was given to France. She lost Rwanda and Burundi, which were given to Belgium. She lost Namibia, which was given to the British. And Tanzania, she also lost Tanganyika, present-day Tanzania, to the British. This left Germany with no colonies to feed her hungry industries. This explains why she decided to invade states such as Czechoslovakia, invade Austria, and later invade Poland, okay, to feed her hungry industries. So the Versailles Peace Settlement made Germany lose her territories, of which this forced Germany to adopt later aggressive imperialistic policies, which contributed to the outbreak of the Second World War. So by later invading Poland on the 1st of September 1939, this led to the outbreak of the Second World War. The Versailles Peace Settlement imposed what we call a puppet, a yes man, a yes regime in Germany. I call it a yes or puppet regime, which was too incompetent and too weak. This was known as the Weimar Republic. So why did these people, the delegates at Versailles, impose a puppet regime known as the Weimar Republic? They wanted to avoid what we call they wanted to avoid German aggression across Europe. They had believed that Germany's aggressive leaders, such as Kaiser William II, had done that. So they needed to impose a puppet regime of the old person by the names of President Hindenburg of the Weimar Republic. So they imposed a puppet regime, which was even too weak militarily. Not only too weak militarily, they even forced that regime to only have 100,000 men. So that regime forced Germans to disarm and remain with just 100,000 men armed with sticks. So the regime couldn't even, the regime itself couldn't solve the socio-economic problems like inflation. This explains why dictators or great orators who later proved to be dictators such as Adolf Hitler rose to power. So they were able to undermine the Weimar Republic, hence contributing to their rise, thus leading to the Second World War. Another way, how did the Versailles Peace Settlement contribute to the outbreak of the Second World War? The Versailles Peace Settlement forced Germany to disarm. While Germany was being forced to disarm or not even have a navy, not even have a strong army, other countries were busy arming themselves, were busy rearming themselves. For example, Britain under by then under George Lloyd, and later people under Lloyd George, and later people such as Winston Churchill and others decided to adopt what we call a rearmament policy. So they kept on building strong ships, okay, the HMS warships. They started building strong air force. Then also you see France did the same, while Germany wasn't. This later forced other people by the names of Adolf Hitler to abandon the disarmament policy and begin rearming Germany and build a strong German army under the likes of Colonel Rommel, building strong air force known as the Luftwaffe, building a strong warship, building strong encryption, strong communication systems known as the German war machine, known as the Enigma. All of this later contributed to the arms race. But it must be noted that the mistakes, okay? So Germany wondered, why are other countries arming themselves? For us, we are disarming. Then also we look at the Versailles Peace Settlement, made Germany lose her rich mineral provinces. She lost her rich mineral provinces of Ruhr region. The Ruhr region, of which this was taken by France, And this created a severe economic crisis. This economic crisis was later exploited by dictators such as Adolf Hitler, by exploiting the economic downturn or the economic collapse of Germany. Adolf Hitler's popularity increased. Then also we see that the Versailles Peace Settlement itself, it laid foundation to the League of Nations, which was too weak to solve European problems or even world affairs. This explains why after the Versailles Peace Settlement, what was discussed, this later led to the formation of the League of Nations, which failed to, number one, to stop what we call Japanese aggression on China. It must be noted that in 1930, Japan decided to invade a rich province of China known as Manchuria and created the puppet state of Manchukuo. Then later, in 1935, Italy under Benito Mussolini decided to invade Abyssinia. Why do I use Abyssinia? Abyssinia is the same as Ethiopia. So if you're a student and you write Abyssinia, there you get the marks, you get the correct points, okay? So in 1935, the Italian troops, okay, under Benito Mussolini, decided to invade what we call Abyssinia or Ethiopia, which later led to the Italo-Ethiopian crisis. That is also one of the most popular topics that comes in African nationalism, the Italo-Ethiopian crisis. So what happened is that it was because of the Versailles Peace Settlement, which laid foundation to the weak League of Nations, which failed to solve such aggression by dictators. As a result of that, this gave Hitler an opportunity to invade what we call Poland on the 1st of September 1939. The Versailles Peace Settlement also, how did it contribute to the outbreak of the 1939-45 Second World War? You see that the Versailles Peace Settlement, the delegates, they themselves, Georges Clemenceau alongside Lloyd George, failed to listen to Wilson Woodrow. Wilson Woodrow had 14 points. He was not too harsh towards the German. However, these stubborn people, particularly Georges Clemenceau, was an old conservative Republican who had witnessed German invade and occupy Paris at the Hall of Mirrors through the Franco-Prussian War and forcing France sign what we call the Treaty of Frankfurt, was aimed at revenge. So they ignored Wilson Woodrow's points, okay, which were lenient, which would have somehow been able to not make German angry. However, they ignored and they kept on not listening to Wilson Woodrow. This left the Germans with deep-rooted hatred towards the French. This explains why the Germans fell on a rival camp. They fell under the Axis powers, okay, a rival camp of France. Then another point is the Versailles Peace Settlement passed what we call harsh economic terms. One of the terms was Germany was forced to pay a heavy war of indemnity of around 6.6 billion pounds. That was 6,600 million. This was too much. This was too much for Germany. It couldn't afford. Remember, Europe and the rest of the world had come out of war, so she couldn't afford that. So it was like as if Germany was being blamed for having caused the war that she was forced to pay, of which she didn't pay that. Then this later led to other people such as Adolf Hitler rising up and forming rival camp of the Axis powers and later declaring war. so you can look at several. I encourage students to be creative. You can look at several weaknesses of the of the Versailles peace settlement. Now let us look at other factors. Okay, the outbreak of the 1929 to 35 Great Economic Depression. So the Great Economic Depression, this was a period of low economic output or production. It was categorized by high levels of unemployment, massive economic collapse across the world. It started in 1929 with the collapse of the Wall Street. How did the Great Economic Depression, first of all, contribute to the outbreak of the Second World War? Number one, you actually see that the Great Economic Depression greatly contributed to the rise of dictators. It contributed to the rise of Adolf Hitler. It was because of the economic depression or the massive unemployment, the massive, in my own words I say, the massive economic misery, that is inflation, unemployment, low production, people's savings, massive banking system collapse, that Adolf Hitler, those dictators were able to capitalize on and undermine the existing government, hence contributing to the rise of dictators such as Adolf Hitler. So, because of the economic depression, some people who were good orators, who later turned to be dictators and ringleaders of the war, were able to campaign, promise heaven on earth, I say heaven, improve the economic situation of their masses. That explains why the Nazi Party was deeply popular in 1930 and 1932, hence contributing to the rise of dictators like Adolf Hitler, thus the Second World War. I wouldn't, students make mistake and include Benito Mussolini. That's wrong. Benito Mussolini rose up in 1922. That was 7 years before the Great Economic Depression. So don't include Benito Mussolini as one of the examples of dictators who rose up as a result of the Great Economic Depression. Then you can explain this in several ways, okay? You can also say that because of the Great Economic Depression, countries adopted what we call aggressive foreign policies. They decided to invade other countries to feed their industries. For example, because of the Great Economic Depression, the Imperial Japan decided to invade Manchuria, which was a rich, fertile plains in eastern China for raw materials, okay, and create a puppet state. This inspired what we call other countries such as Italy to invade Ethiopia in 1935, of which Germany was inspired to invade Poland in 1939, hence leading to the outbreak of the Second World War. Let us look at another point, the appeasement policy. What was the appeasement policy and how did it contribute to the outbreak of the Second World War? The appeasement policy, in my own words, I say that this was the appeasement policy. This was a policy adopted by mainly Britain and France to do what? To please the rising dictators, the new dictators of Europe. They feared to make them angry. They feared to antagonize them. For example, the appeasement policy. This was adopted mainly by Britain and France to appease the dictators like Benito Mussolini, Hitler, and this other man by the names of Emperor Hirohito. What happened, for example, the appeasement policy, when German, I can give you an example. In 1930, when Japan invaded Manchuria, Britain and France didn't want to make what we call Japan angry. So because of not wanting to make Japan angry, then this inspired what we call Italy to invade Ethiopia, and later inspired German to invade Austria, Czechoslovakia, and later, still even when Germany invaded Austria and Czechoslovakia, still these people didn't want to anger German. So they decided to keep quiet. As a result of deciding to keep quiet, the dictators now perceived the appeasement policy as these countries were weak, okay? As allied powers, as Britain and France were weak. So they felt that these countries were weak. So that's why you see Hitler decided to invade Poland, knew that after all these people are weak. Japan already invaded Manchuria. Italy already invaded Ethiopia. I've already invaded Czechoslovakia. I've already invaded Austria. So these people are weak. So he was inspired to invade Poland on the 1st of September, hence leading to the outbreak of the Second World War. Then we can also look at another point of what we call now let me give the involvement of the US, okay? The bombing of the US military base. So the bombing of the US military base in Hawaii, known as Pearl Harbor. On the 7th of December 1941, Japanese warplanes decided to bomb the US military base at Pearl Harbor. This later led the United States to get involved in the war. So USA get involved in the war. So Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States, was very angry and decided now to support members of the members of the Allied powers, who included Britain, France, Russia, to fight against the Axis powers. Then we look at another point, such as the weakness of the League of Nations. The League of Nations, this, as you look at, it was previously formed after the Versailles Peace Settlement, okay? So from around 1923. What happened is that the League of Nations was too weak. It was too weak, okay? It was too weak to solve European and world affairs militarily. These people would just sit on the table, but they couldn't solve. They never had an army. Even when Japan invaded Manchuria, they just turned a deaf ear. Modern historians strongly believe that the League of Nations was a toothless barking dog. This explains why some countries like Italy, Japan, and Germany withdrew from the League of Nations. They saw it was so weak. In my own words, I say, had the League of Nations had like a long-standing army and decided to put pressure, for example, on Italy to withdraw her troops from Ethiopia, or put pressure on Germany to withdraw her troops from what we call Austria or Czechoslovakia, what would have happened there? There wouldn't have been Germany's invasion. However, these dictators saw the Axis powers, saw that the League of Nations was so weak, hence leading to Germany invading Poland, thus the outbreak of the war. Then another point is Germany's invasion of what we call Poland on the 1st of September. As you know, that Germany previously had thought that members, had previously believed that members of the so-called Allied members of the Allied powers who had formed what we call the appeasement policy were too weak. You know, the appeasement policy, this had been spearheaded previously by the British Prime Minister known as Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain, who was later succeeded by Winston Churchill. So this appeasement policy had been brought by Neville Chamberlain to appeal, okay, to please the dictators, not to confront them. So with Germany's invasion of Poland, so Adolf Hitler had miscalculated, in my own words I say he had miscalculated that these powers of the appeasement, these guys of the appeasement policy were too weak. However, Britain this time was under a different leader by the names of Winston Churchill. He was different from the so-called He was different from the so-called Neville Chamberlain. So Britain and France decided to pass an ultimatum towards what we call Germany, towards Adolf Hitler, that you had better withdraw your troops. Okay, Hitler didn't listen. Then on the 3rd, 2 days later, 3rd September, Britain and France decided to declare war. After declaring war, what happened also, Germany did the same. After doing the same, so Germany invaded France. You must understand that France was severely defeated during that time, and a puppet regime was put in place, okay, known as Vichy France. And so that puppet state, Vichy France, under the leader of Marshal Pétain. It must be noted that these other nationalists, such as General de Gaulle, okay, the Free French Army, were fighting on the side of Britain, and other allied powers. But France had been severely defeated, and after being severely defeated, it was only liberated in 1945 after the D-Day landings of Normandy. So that's how, but France had been defeated. Then also you see what happened. Russia also was involved, okay? How was Russia further involved in the war? In 1941, Germany decided, under Hitler, came up with an audacious operation known as Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, this was an operation where Germany wanted to get the rich natural gas reserves and oil reserves of Russian Empire. So Operation Barbarossa, the Germans decided to invade what we call Russia. They decided to invade Russia. However, Hitler, like his predecessor, didn't learn from the lessons. Decided to invade Russia, forgetting of the hard Russian winter. Okay, forgot from his predecessor, and from others, failed to learn from the mistakes of the great Napoleon. Okay, failed to give the Germans what we call strong, heavy coats, strong boots. Majority of the German troops ended up freezing in the Russian winter. Then later, the Russian troops led by General Zhukov decided to carry out a counteroffensive back. So Germans were coming close to Moscow. They had successfully captured states of Stalingrad, Petrograd. They were moving towards Moscow. However, the winter favored the Russians, and the Russians successfully now began pushing the Germans back towards, forcing the Germans to retreat until 1945, when Hitler was forced to hide in a bunker and later swallow a cyanide capsule. That was around 30th of April 1945. Then also you see, so we have seen how Russia was involved, okay? Russia was involved when Germany decided to invade her under Operation Barbarossa. Then also Japan, for her, she was already aggressive. So the war really ended officially in Europe with Hitler committing suicide and Germany signing surrender. Then also you see Japan later surrendering on the 12th of September. Then let us look at the rise of dictators, okay?